When we left off with chapter one, we kind of ended this talking about or introducing this idea of pre-planning. So the way that pre-planning kind of fits into all of this is that you want to get a general sketch of the situation that you're dealing with, some of the characteristics of the population that you'll be working with, the organizational structure at which the program will take place. Are there any partners or potential partners out there that you could align with and perhaps share resources? And then, basically just have an overall sense of what the program or your vision of the program would look like so that you have kind of a foundation or base to start the actual planning process. But before we get to actually designing the program, coming up with objectives and that sort of thing, we want to kind of follow along the steps to make sure that all our efforts that we put into planning a program actually are viable in the first place, right? That there is some level of agreement or acceptance that the organization that you're working with is open to using that organizational structure to deliver a health promotion program. So we start off with this idea that there's a formalized structure to how we approach developing and planning a program. Okay, and I want that to always remain at the forefront, is that program design, program planning, right, is something that is formalized, right? You want to make sure that you have kind of an outline or guidelines to help you determine what the steps are along the way when you're planning this program. We want to move away from an idea that you'll figure this out as you go along. That is absolutely not the situation you want to be in. Now, with that being said, there's some loose guidelines to kind of help you determine what needs to be done during this process. However, there's a lot of variety in the situations that may be present in terms of health issues. There may be certain population characteristics that kind of force you to take those characteristics into consideration and incorporate that into your planning process. So again, we'll sketch out a rough outline of the steps to take, but when you actually go into practice, just realize there's going to be some tweaking to meet the specific needs of the group and the situation you're working with. Now, sometimes maybe you're alerted to existing needs, and maybe it's kind of an allegorical thing, maybe it's an observation thing, but at some point the topic comes up, hey, I noticed this group has an issue with these particular health problems. Okay, well that can help kind of get you started on the right foot, right, with a particular target, or I should say a potential target health issue that you're working with. But in other cases, there may not be anything obvious, and you'll need to go through and do the needs assessment. Perhaps you have come across a program that has demonstrated success, and maybe in your mind you could say, well, I know of some organizations that could benefit from a program structured like this. Again, you don't want to necessarily take a program that's already been developed and apply it to a different target population, even if they are or they do have some similarities. The end result may be you keep major aspects of this pre-developed program or this pre-existing program, but you only want to do so as long as there's evidence to support that your target population is in a situation that is appropriate to that selected existing program that's out there. Uh, the bullet that says some have autonomy and authority to start, meaning that the program group right? They have that autonomy. They can decide, okay, here's what the program needs are, here's what resources we need. Um, we're going to go ahead and secure those resources and move forward. However, depending on the organizational structure that you're going to be delivering this program in, it may not work out that way. For example, in a school-based setting, I've done some projects with school-based entities, and typically you're going to need to have support through the district superintendent, or maybe even the school principal. But the point is, if you identify an individual or group of individuals that are the decision makers, well, you're going to have to get them on board, because they're the one that kind of control entry into the organization in order for these programs to be realized. And along the way, again, you want to align yourselves with as many allies within the organization as you can. That's really going to add to your program's ability to be successful. Okay, so say you've identified the key decision makers within your organization. So these are going to be the ones that basically give a green light or a red light to your program proposal. So you're going to need to put together a rationale to gain their support, right? So we'll talk about the rationale as we go through, but really this is going to be kind of your marketing materials, right? You are selling this program idea to decision makers in a way that it makes it easier for them to decide, yes, this is something we want to invest in. This is something we want to make available to the members of our organization. This is necessary because all of these programs are going to require resources. And typically the organizations that you partner with, they're going to be providing the resources. So they want to see, what are these resources going to benefit the organization. So again, your rationale, you need to think about things from their perspective, right? What do they value? How does your program proposal contribute to that value? Another thing you want to look at are decision makers. They're going to be applying, the organizational policies. Do the policies align with what you're trying to do? Value, right? So health, right? Improving health, that's basically what we are selling, right? Do the decision makers place value on that? If it's unknown, or maybe they're not placing as much value as you think they should be, then your rationale or your marketing, right, has to increase the value of that product you're selling, which is the health promotion program. And then finally, having decision makers on board is always key, because they're probably in charge of making decisions for other aspects of the organization, and it can help you jump through all the hurdles that implementing a health promotion program within an existing organization brings along. At the front of your mind going into this, right, gaining support for your program, right, that has to be at the front. Without support, your program's not likely to be realized, and or even if your program is put into place, again, not having support really it's going to be very difficult for your program to be implemented. There's a lot of factors that go into that besides making resources available. I know in worksite settings, motivation among employees tends to be correlated with the perceived importance of the program to supervisors and management. So if you have support coming from the top down, you're more likely to get buy-in from the actual target population the program is intended for. Now, if the idea for a health promotion program comes from the top, okay, then half the battle's already won. You know that there's going to be some built-in support if you were to expand on that idea and ultimately design a program around that idea. However, while that's certainly a possible scenario, more likely you're going to get ideas about potential programs that come from the population that is actually going to be impacted by the program. Now, in that case, you will need to gain top level support. An example is the tobacco free policy that's on the FAU campus. We had, and I'll use this example among others throughout, but basically we had a program group put together to kind of flesh out this idea of a tobacco free policy. However, we all knew going in that without university president support that we weren't going to get that. Now, how do you get that top level support? How do you sell that to the ultimate decision maker? Well, it's a situation that depends on who that decision maker is, what they value, kind of what their vision is, and what you put together to sell to one person or one group may not be adequate for a different group. So again, you need to know who you're working with, who you're selling to, what they value, that sort of thing. Now, once you start to get a sense of these items, then you can start to put together your rationale. Okay, down here I have a written proposal. So basically, it's your marketing materials, your marketing document. You want decision makers to read that rationale and then leave with this sense of, hey, this is something important and it's something that our organization needs to get behind. Okay, so how do you find out what decision makers value as it relates to health promotion? Well, there's many different ways you can do so. Maybe you have a previous working experience with the decision maker, so you have a sense of that. Maybe there are individuals in this kind of pre-planning group that have that type of relationship with the decision maker and give you some insight. But if you go into a situation, or I guess this would apply to essentially all situations, you want to assess their level of agreement on certain dimensions, topics, constructs. So what we have on this slide is leading by example, LBE instrument. So instrument is simply a device that we're using to collect data, to measure something. In this case, it's going to be a questionnaire or survey instrument. And based on how the respondent answers or addresses the items throughout the instrument, right, the idea is that that's going to give you some sense of what they feel is important. Now, the LBE instrument, here's the reference for that, is a valid instrument. So I want to pause here just to make sure everybody understands what that means by having a valid instrument. So validity, and often you'll hear reliability presented with that term at the same time. So validity and reliability of an instrument is very important, because you want to make sure that if you're going through all the effort to distribute this instrument, collect the data, analyze the data, interpret the data, that the data are actually reflective of what you're trying to capture. So when we say we have a valid instrument, basically it's accuracy. So if you're saying that this instrument assesses leadership support for health promotion programs in work settings, that the instrument actually does illuminate, right, the leadership support of health promotion programs in work settings. the further away from that, right, there's going to be a decrease in validity, decrease in accuracy. Now, reliability, on the other hand, kind of goes hand in hand with validity. So if you do have a valid instrument, well, you want it to be valid in every instance that you use it, right? That repeatability or consistency. That's reliability. Again, I'm not sure what your background is. If you've had a graduate level statistics course, hopefully these are things that you're familiar with, because statistical analyses is one way, probably the most prominent way of assessing validity and reliability of an instrument based on collected data. Now, if we go further down the slide, we see that there's a four-factor scale. Okay, so a scale is a collection of items that, when they're looked at together, give you a sense of some construct that you're trying to measure. Just a basic rule of thumb, a scale should be a minimum of 3 items, and this kind of contributes to the statistical power of the analyses to detect changes in the scale. Now, so back here, this four-factor scale. So basically what they're saying is the LBE instrument, right, X number of items on the instrument. When you do something, a statistical analysis called factor analysis. And factor analysis is a very complex view of correlations among the instrument items. And it presents the results in such a way that you can assign specific items from the LBE scale to certain factors or dimensions that are being captured. Okay, so for example, say there were 20 items in the LBE. 5 of those items, through the factor analyses and the statistics that are the results that are returned, may load together. And what this four-factor scale is saying is that there's 4 groupings of items that tend to load together based on eigenvalues and that sort of thing, and actually form what's called subscales, right? So LBE, the total instrument, that would be the scale, and we could say that it's comprised of 4-factor subscales. So each grouping of items, right, measures one of these 4 things. So business alignment with health promotion objectives, right? So there's going to be items maybe assessing how much of agreement they have that says, okay, well, our business agenda aligns with what's happening in the health promotion program. The second factor, awareness of the economics of health and worker productivity. Okay, so there's going to be some items on there that address whether or not the person taking the survey, if they agree that, economics of a healthy workforce is a better situation than the economics of an unhealthy workforce. The third factor, worksite support for health promotion, right? Do the respondents support having worksite health promotion programs delivered within the working environment? And then finally, the fourth factor, leadership support for health promotion. So the way that it's set up, you can use Likert scale responses, generate some means, and then you can apply parametric statistics to assess, are there any significant differences among these 4 factors? Do 1 or 2 or 3 factors seem to rise to the top in terms of importance? These are the things that you want to make sure your rationale addresses, because again, you're trying to secure support from decision makers, and this kind of gives you an idea of what you need to address in order to achieve that support. Okay, so before you start developing your rationale, right, you want to get a sense of, okay, what what am I getting into? What does this rationale entail? So again, keep in mind this is a generalized approach, and situations will, they may alter the items or the steps in the creation rationale, but for the most part, this gives you a general sense. So the first thing is, remember, this is your marketing materials. So you need to identify appropriate background information, but you also need to consider the audience that you're going to be delivering this rationale to. So the breadth of your this section, how much background information you provide, depends on the audience that you're working with. If you're working with business-minded people, they may not be that familiar with the health aspects in populations, or in the work site. So you need to think about this, but this is basically captured or achieved through your literature review. Your title of the rationale, again, we'll address these in specifically as we go through, but you want something that's concise, to the point, that captures what you're trying to do. Then you write the content of the rationale, kind of just providing a description of the program and the needs and that sort of thing. And then finally you end with your bibliography, or your list of references, so that one, the person reading the rationale can go there and kind of look where your sources come from, make an assessment as to their credibility. It also gives them an opportunity to locate the resource and maybe dive into it a little bit more deeply, to answer some questions that they may still have, if other than asking you. So again, I mentioned this earlier, gaining support is make or break, right? It's red light, green light, in most cases. So in order to gain that support, you want to make sure your rationale is sound, that it's complete, it's comprehensive. You don't want to be in a situation where you bring a group of decision makers together, you present your rationale, and there are many questions about the program that still linger, right? And that's going to require a follow-up meeting. And just keep in mind that, especially in work site settings, and I'll just, and this extends to most organizations, is that people's time is a valuable resource, and you want to use that wisely. Again, I mentioned before, there's no specific steps to developing a rationale beyond this generalized approach. That is something that you're going to have to tailor to the group that you're working with, trying to convince. The book presents this inverted triangle, basically showing you the logic behind the rationale, and basically the idea is you go from this broad concept down to a narrowly focused concept. But the idea is that why you start off broad is that you're going to be interacting with individuals with varying levels of experience and knowledge about health promotion. So you're going to have to help them take steps forward, so that you can ultimately get to a point where you're saying, look, here's the program, this is what we would like to do. Right, so you have a title, right? That's what's going to bring people in. They're going to look at that at a glance. We all do it, right? What's the minimum amount of information I need to consume to know more about what this meeting's all about? We do it all the time. So you want to make sure your title kind of achieves that particular purpose. Once you identify potential health issues, you want to show that the scope of the problem, and this may be benefited by showing the problem as it exists in larger communities, larger populations, and it's especially helpful if there's already an existing agenda from that community or a locality to address that issue, right? It kind of makes the decision easier to get behind if there's evidence to support that others are dealing with the same issue, others are working towards developing programs to address that issue. we'll go through here about identifying the problem, your problem statement, and that sort of thing. But basically, here the logic flows is: one, you make the case that, hey, here's a problem that this organization is faced with. Then you want to say, here's my solution through the health promotion program to address that particular problem. Then you want to say, well, here are the benefits that are going to come from addressing this problem. You want to demonstrate or give some evidence that supports, hey, if the decision makers invest resources into this program, that it's likely to produce successful results. Right? We can do this, utilize some evidence-based studies and that sort of thing. And then finally, again, we end with making sure they have the references available so that they can go in and follow up on information that you're providing them. Okay, so let's start at a major component is: what is appropriate background to include in the rationale? Well, some things you want to consider. The priority population, right? The target population that you want to work with. What are their specific needs? Now I have down here wants, and understand that there is a difference, and a lot of this is wrapped up in perceptions. So the priority population, they may not be versed in health related topics, and they may come to you and say, I wish they had more water fountains available, or I wish there was more of more fans to create a breeze. Well, we can take those perceptions and kind of backtrack and say, okay, well, what health issue is related to that? Maybe it's a very hot environment, and they want water fountains and fans to avoid heat stress. Well, heat stress may be the health issue. So you want to be able to kind of navigate perceptions related to health issues to help identify what those health issues are. Now, once you identify the health problem within your target population, well, what's the health status? You may want to compare and contrast that to other groups to show that, hey, there's this problem is shared among other similar organizations, but we seem to have maybe it's more of a problem at this group, or whatever. You just want to make it relevant to kind of what's going on outside the organization. Again, we're trying to help decision makers arrive at the appropriate decision. The potential outcomes of the program, okay, how does that align with what decision makers view as importance? So if you're working with an organization like FAU, right, decision makers are going to be the administrators, and administrators value, among other things, is student academic success, graduation rates. So you want to make an argument or to link the health issues that exist on campus as impacting, right, academic success and graduation rates, right? That's going to help decision makers, again, get on board with what you're trying to do. Show compatibility with the health plan of a state or a nation, okay? Maybe the state has an agenda to increase health status of a particular group, and that particular group shares a lot of characteristics with the target population that you're working with. Again, it helps justify that this need I've identified in this group, right? It's shared. It's something that the state recognizes and has got behind. Again, helps decision makers support what you're trying to do. Okay, provide evidence that a proposed program will make a difference. This it's certainly something that you want to do if evidence is available. So there may, you may be working with a novel health motion program idea that there are no demonstrated successes out there because this program's never been implemented before. But if your program is similar to other programs that have been implemented, they've been evaluated, the evaluations are supportive that these programs are effective, then certainly you want to include those types of things. And then finally, show how the proposed program will protect and preserve the single biggest asset of most organizations, the people. Again, you know, there has to be a benefit that comes out of participation in this program. Otherwise, you know, it comes into question, well, why should we fund this program? Now, in work sites and in most organizations, right, they're operating under a budget. And anything that takes away from that budget, right, like I said, all programs are going to require resources. They're going to require some investment from the organization to fund your program. They want to see how those dollars, right, directed towards the program, what are those dollars going to do? What are they going to produce? Right? So we have a cost benefit analysis, right? They're looking at the program cost me this. Here are the benefits that this proposal kind of puts forward. Is there, you know, is it fiscally responsible? Return on investment. Now, return on investment, this is a simple calculation, right? And we'll get to that slide next when we're looking at it. But return on investment is a term that's very common among many organizations, right? Because it's always, here's your budget beginning of the year, you know, what did you produce, right? They're used to seeing things like that. CDC and RTI International. RTI International is basically a group that assists with various health evaluation measures, but they put together a tool to help you calculate ROI, and this next slide kind of shows you what goes into that calculation. Okay, so you have your ROI. That's what we're interested in. Now we take the benefits of the investment, right? What benefits your program is going to produce, and we subtract from that the amount that was initially invested divided by that amount that was invested. Now, the benefits of investment, here's where the tricky part is, right? So you know, the amount invested, you're going to get a clear sense of what's that dollar amount, but the benefits. Yeah, benefits of investment, you need to think about a way that you can place a value on the benefits you think your program is going to produce. For example, so let's stick with this worksite setting. So absenteeism, right? The number of days that people stay home from work because of illness. Now, you know, is it a situation where if they were in better physical fitness, they wouldn't get the illness? Or maybe, you know, part of your health motion program is to encourage vaccination, like flu vaccination. Well, you know, that's going to reduce absenteeism. So you need to think about, you know, how the organization values missing days at work and try to come up with a dollar amount. I also want to introduce this term. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not be, but it's called presenteeism, right? So it sounds like absenteeism, but what we're dealing with here is when people come to work and they come with a compromised health status, whether it's a physical health issue or a mental health issue, and their productivity isn't what it normally would be if they didn't have or bring that issue to work. You can look at medical costs that or medical expenditures that the organization puts out over a year, and a healthier workforce would reduce those medical costs. But anyway, if you're going to talk about ROI, you need to think about how am I going to evaluate the benefits. And Basically, ROI just creates a relatively easily evaluated result. If you look at the bottom, when ROI equals 0 through that calculation, right, the program pays for itself, right? That's easier to sell. If ROI is greater than 0, right, really the program kind of sells itself at that point. But and then some of these things, some of these ROIs, it it may take time to get an ROI that is fiscally responsible, right? So, the first year of the program, the benefits and the way that those benefits result in dollars saved, right? It may be slow to start to generate those dollars. So you may start off with an ROI of less than one, which means that the program costs, they invest more money than the benefits produce. But you may have a 5-year outlook where ROI steadily increases year to year. But again, you need to think of it in terms of the perspective that the decision maker or decision makers value. And in case of worksite, and this extends to other organizations in terms of budgets, um, you know, what makes the most sense? Does this program align with budget projections for the organization? Okay, step two, title of the rationale. Again, you want to keep it simple. You want something where once they read that title, the person has a general sense of what this program's all about. Okay. Um, Now the second bullet, this is kind of along the lines of manuscript format, but basically it's you want to list the authorship, right? Who contributed to this rationale, and typically what you see is either you can do it in alphabetical. Um, in some cases, those that contributed more appear at the beginning of the list, and you kind of work your way through. Um, but ultimately, you want to give credit where credit is due. Okay, writing the content of the rationale. This can be a little bit daunting because you're in a situation where you want to provide enough information where the reader can kind of follow along, but you don't want to provide too much information that kind of discourages people from reading through the entire rationale. So it's a balance. So the first thing you want to begin with is identifying the suspected health issues that may exist in your target population, and then relate that to other communities, other larger populations. How does that health issue fit in with their situation? How's it being addressed? Okay, from that, you want to identify, you want to kind of minimize your list of health issues to the most pertinent ones, or maybe even you settle on a single health problem that this program is going to address. Just keep in mind, the more health problems that you're going to address, the more comprehensive your health promotion program needs to be. But once you identify that health problem, then you want to put together a problem statement. And a statement, right, single sentence that simply describes the health problem as it relates to your target population. Um, you want to include why it's a problem. You know, so saying someone has, so maybe presenteeism shows up in your problem statement. Well, you know, why does problem statement or presenteeism, why is it something that we should be focused on, and why it should be dealt with? And then finally, again, with your audience in mind, you need to think about the comfort level with dealing with numerical data. Um, Rule of thumb, the general population isn't that comfortable dealing with heavy data-driven results. So this idea of social math basically takes the data and reframes it in a way that your audience can relate to it. There are several examples in the book. So when you're talking about, oh, this impacts 1,500 people out of 100,000 people. Sometimes that's hard to gauge, or kind of it's hard to perceive how extensive that problem is, especially when you're dealing with data that's you know is in decimal format. Usually that's when you see the multiplication by 1,000 or 100,000, like 4.9 individuals per 1,000 individuals. And people start to focus on that 4.9 number, say, 4.9, that's a relatively low number. Is this really a problem? Social math, you would take that and give a kind of a real world example that people could relate to. Okay, once you state your problem, okay, well, what is the solution to that problem? Is it something that can be addressed? Okay, so you want to include the name and purpose of the program and a general overview of what the program is going to include. So again, remember your audience. They're reading this rationale to ultimately decide, is this program in their mind is worthwhile to pursue. Okay, you want to state why the program will be successful, right? You want to give them confidence that, hey, this program can work and can produce these particular results. The use of evidence-based, right? That's the key phrase there. Evidence-based practice support the rationale. Evidence-based simply would be if you could find other similar types of programs and similar types of settings that have undergone evaluation, and that evaluation has produced results that can be interpreted as a successful program. You want to say, hey, look, here's a similar program with demonstrated success. It's not unreasonable to expect our program to have a similar type of success. Again, you want to follow or conclude your rationale with your list of references. What were the sources of the information that you provided in the rationale? Down at the bottom has used APA format. That's a pretty common format in health promotion literature. That's the format I use in my courses, and it's just a consistency that your references all present the information in the same way so that people can easily navigate through your reference list to look into or secure the information that they're interested in. Okay, the next thing we need to consider is your planning committee, right? Who are you going to bring in? Who are you going to involve in kind of not only planning the rationale, but other aspects of the program? And you want to make sure that you're bringing people in that can actually contribute to what you're doing, and you want to kind of be weary of bringing in people that their motivation is just to serve on a committee, that don't really add to the discussion or anything like that. Because one of the things that you can run into is when you have you're going to have to manage this committee, or someone's going to have to manage this committee, and if you have a large number of people, then things can kind of impede the committee's ability to be efficient. So you want to identify individuals willing to serve as a member. So you don't want some woman that feels like they've been forced to be on this committee. It's a much better situation when people want to be a part of something that's going to create a program. You don't want to be the one that's providing the motivation for individuals to work on the committee. You want the motivation to come from them. Again, the number of individuals, you just want to make sure that your membership is made up of individuals that can be part of the solution that you're seeking. Again, there's no ideal size other than just saying everybody involved is contributing to the success of the program, contributing to the development of the rationale, contributing to the development of the program. again, when you get large numbers of people, there's a lot of other things that you need to consider. Anybody that's ever served in a management role understands this, is even simply deciding on a time and day to hold the meetings can be problematic because people are juggling their own schedules, trying to find where their openings are. Meetings get pushed back until you can find an appropriate day. It can be a tremendous undertaking. So again, you got to keep the management aspect of the committee in mind as well. Now, also potential members of the planning committee may involve partnering with other groups. These may be other groups within the organization that you're working with, or they may be from outside the organization. When FAU OWLS Care, right, that's the student health promotion group, was putting together a smoking cessation program. They brought in area health educators to assist with that, and basically it works so that you can kind of share resources. They bring in expertise and personnel that you don't have to account for or provide, but you want to be very careful that you select partners whose mission or vision aligns with what your health promotion program committee is seeking. Right? You don't want to partner up with groups where you're fundamentally opposed in terms of philosophies and that sort of thing. So again, select partners that you can actually work with. Other things to consider: does the partnership involve partners that also want to meet the needs of your priority population or your target population? Do they see the problem the same way that you see the problem? Okay, if they see a different problem and you're partnering with it, well, they're going to try to highlight here's what we see the issue is, and then there's some instability that can arise from that. Resources, right? So a partnership usually involves sharing resources. Okay, so it's got to be beneficial for both in order for the partnership to work. And then also, are there groups out there that they could further their mission by partnering with your organization? Okay, again, it makes it easier to sell this idea of forming a partnership if both groups see a benefit coming from the partnership. Okay, so now you're putting together your planning committee. What are some things that you need to keep in mind? Well, you want to look at the membership, and you want it to come from all the affected entities and populations affected by the health promotion program. So, for example, with the tobacco-free policy at FAU, the initial committee was made up of faculty. It was made up of staff. For example, we had faculty from certainly the health related disciplines, exercise science and health promotion, nursing, med school, but we also had faculty that for whatever reason they were supportive of creating a tobacco free policy on campus. Right, so they bring that. We had staff members. We had individuals that worked at the campus library. One of the problem areas for smoking was in the courtyard outside the library, and the people that worked library kind of noticed this and would like it to go away. So they were on part of it. We had people from the physical plant. They would be the ones that were removing the ashtrays from designated areas, would be posting signs. So we wanted to make sure that this was something that fell within kind of their area. We had legal representation, so FAU attorneys, since we were developing policies, these things have to be written in a certain way. So, and then we also had student representation. I know we had several members from the student council. We had students that were just simply interested in doing something to create a more healthy campus. So basically, so that means during discussions within the committee, right, you're getting perspectives from as many various aspects as possible. Now, while we didn't actively pursue someone that was a smoker to see how they were impacted by the policy or how they perceived they would be impacted, we had a number of former smokers to kind of get that sense of how would this policy impact those that smoke, and what kind of opposition would be raised and that sort of thing. Again, it's all about perspectives. Oftentimes we can go into a situation and we clearly see, what the problem is. However, it may be a situation where that's our unique perspective. There's other lenses at which to view it, and hearing from those individuals and hearing those perspectives again helps us come up with a comprehensive approach. And then finally, the committee should be composed of individuals willing to serve on the committee. They want to see the program because, a lot of times, morale and motivation can wane, and you just need people that are upbeat, or can drive the committee meetings, can drive the progress of the committee. Um, it just makes for a more dynamic experience. Okay, continuing on. Someone has a key role in the organization, right? So we had members from administration who were on that committee. Uh, One, it helped to, ultimately we need to get top level support. So, having someone in administration to move the proposal up the chain, right, was very, very helpful. Committee include other representatives of other stakeholders, right? Again, we try to be as inclusive as possible without creating this, massive committee that would be hard to manage. Again, you want to make sure that you're getting as many perspectives as possible, and regularly evaluate membership to ensure fulfillment of goals and objectives. When the Tobacco Free Committee was working on kind of the advertising, the health communication on campus, and deciding, okay, do we need to have signs, posters, videos, whatnot. Uh, we would bring in people from communication, FAU communications. We bring in people from physical plant to say, okay, well, you can put signs here, but this area is off limits. And then kind of once we work through those issues, we really didn't need them to be a part of the committee from that point forward. So we looked at, okay, who could we replace them with? We had membership from FAU police. Again, when we were talking about potential enforcement strategies, what the viewpoint is. Again, they served an important role, but it was just for one component of the planning process. And after we moved past that, we still retained them as committee members, but they didn't necessarily have to attend every meeting. Leadership, that changed over a couple times. Again, just getting a fresh perspective on what we're doing can be helpful. Number 7 kind of goes along with kind of what I wrapped up with. The committee serves a purpose, right? And over a continuum, kind of working towards meeting that purpose, right? The primary objectives may change along the way, so you just want to make sure that the committee's adapting to those changes as we go along. Be aware of politics. No matter what organization you're working with, there's going to be office politics involved. And this is one of the hardest things to deal with in my mind, because oftentimes you don't know that the politics is going to be a problem until it's a problem, and then you have to deal with it. And a lot of times it's difficult to deal with office politics because you can't apply logic necessarily in all cases to deal with the issues. Um, and it just, for example, you may have two members of the committee that outside the committee within the organization they may be at odds, whether it's financially or policy wise, or whatever it is, and you don't want them to carry that over into their participation within the committee, but it does happen. Numbers, again, you want to make sure that your committee is efficient. You have the right people in the right places to make the right decisions and work on the right things without having a bunch of other members that are part of the committee, but they're just not utilized as much. Again, we address that in our tobacco policy by making some of the meetings optional, by having an agenda where we could forward the agenda to the individual and say, look, this is what we're going to be discussing today. If you think that you can contribute to this, you're certainly welcome to attend. But if you think this is outside your area, we can follow up with the meeting note or the meeting minutes, address it that way. Again, it's all in efficiency and just kind of managing people so that if we're in that meeting for an hour and a half, that it was a very productive hour and a half. It wasn't a lot of shuffling around, that sort of thing. And then some situations you might need multiple layers of planning committees. One of the things that we did on the tobacco-free policy was we had a subcommittee that actually looked at the verbiage that would make up the policy, the actual wording. It wasn't necessary for every member of the committee to work on this, right? So we had a subcommittee, they worked on it, then presented it back to the larger committee, and we could kind of discuss it. So again, it's all based on efficiency and how effective you're using committee members. Okay, so here we go, a graphical representation of a quote solid committee. So we begin with representatives from all segments of the priority population who will be impacted either directly or indirectly by the program, the policy, whatever it is you're working on. You want to make sure that there are representatives from those groups so that you can share the perspectives. Doers, right? Every group needs those individuals that get things done, that are motivated to go out do the work. Without doers, everybody can come up with great ideas, but if nobody's going out there and actually putting those ideas in play, nothing happens. Influencers, right? You want to gain momentum. You want to gain support from the priority population for what you're doing, right? You may want to identify certain individuals that have the ear of the priority population. Representative of sponsoring agency. Again, these are talking about partnerships, agencies that are providing resources. Well, let's have a representative from that agency so they can convey back to their group. Okay, here's what's been going on, but they can also share, kind of what the vision and mission of the agency itself, so that we can make sure that what we're deciding in the committee aligns with what our partners are doing. Other stakeholders, right? Again, anybody that has a vested interest in what your committee is trying to accomplish, right? That could be a benefit to you to include them in the process. Good leadership. Somebody has to herd all the cats, right? Somebody has to make sure that, if we pair off into subgroups, that each subgroup is staying on task, that, each meeting is productive, who's developing the agenda and sending that out, who's making sure that the meeting follows the agenda. So you got to have good leadership. You address all those things, and then that's a pretty good committee to have, and chances are you're going to be effective with that committee. Okay, so how do you select members? When volunteers, right? So volunteers, ideally they're self-motivated, right? They hear about the opportunity, they want to be a part of the opportunity. Okay, we can do that. Holding an election. Um, yeah, I could see that. Again, it just depends on the nature of the committee, but it usually comes up to um, who's going to be leading the committee, who's going to be leading each of the subcommittees, who's going to be taking the minutes, that sort of thing. And, if you have multiple people that are interested, okay, well, let's have an election. Sometimes it's a situation where nobody steps up or volunteers to do those types of things, and we start nominating and voting on people to do that. It's sometimes it's necessary. Inviting and recruiting people to serve. It may be a situation where individual could contribute to the committee, but they're just not aware that there's a committee in place to do these types of things. So, each of us, when we sat down on the committee, we kind of all thought about, who would be good to bring in, right? And then when you would go out and recruit those individuals. Having members formally appointed by a governing group or individual. I do believe there was an appointment from administration. I'm not sure how that all went down, but at the time, I believe it was President Brogan. We had worked on this tobacco-free policy for a number of years. So Brogan that's probably back in '09. But anyway, he appointed someone from administration to be a part of the committee. Why he appointed that person, it's unclear to me, but that's how they became part of it. Have an application process, so selecting those. Usually you run into this, or I should say, we ran into this when students wanted to be a part of the committee. Um, you're going to have a higher number of students than you would some of the other members, or at least we did in that situation, and we just couldn't bring them all in to the meetings, simply because, again, managing and keeping the meetings on track would have been a little bit more burdensome. So we had an application process, and we looked at those that had maybe had previous experience sitting on a committee. Maybe they had a health related background, student worker in healthcare, in ALS care, something like that. um, and in always you have to have a leader, right? Somebody has to manage all of these individuals. Okay, parameters for planning is basically understanding the environment or the situation that you're operating in. So if we look at this first one, what is the decision maker's philosophical perspective on health promotion programs? This is very important, because if they're not supportive of the health promotion program, then there's not going to be a health promotion program. With the tobacco-free policy, after Brogan, we went through an interim university president, and then we had President Saunders. Um, and when we approached her, she wasn't very supportive of going tobacco-free at the time. We that caused us to pause, because the writing on the wall was that she wouldn't support this policy. So you know maybe we should hold off on presenting that to her until maybe the situation changed. Actually, the situation did change. There was a turnover in presidency, but the President Kelly, who's president now, was supportive, and things got rolling again, and eventually the policy went through. Uh, Number two, what type of commitment to the program are decision makers willing to make? Are they interested in the program becoming institutionalized? Again, with the policy, the tobacco-free policy is a formal policy at FAU. If that was our end goal, was to create that policy. If we were dealing with a decision maker that did not share that end goal, then you have to stop and reevaluate, is this worthwhile pursuing? What type of financial support are they willing to survive? This is always, this has to be at the forefront. What resources do you actually have to get this through? The tobacco policy, there was money set aside. We did have a budget. I received a grant from Florida Department of Health to kind of help facilitate certain aspects of the policy, but you have to have resources. Bottom line. All right, so I want to draw your attention to a term used in number 4, organizational culture. In this instance, culture isn't really reflective of ethnicities. To some extent, I guess it could be, but basically, an organizational culture is the collection of shared beliefs and values, and the collection of beliefs comes from members of that organization. For example, in terms of acceptance of a tobacco-free policy, you may have one university that the general sense is that individuals within the organization support having a tobacco-free campus, but there could also be a possibility of a university where that support isn't isn't present. We ran into this a little bit when we looked at the Davie campus of FAU, and the Davie campus, it's a shared campus, right? You have FAU and you also have Broward College, with a community college, and the support of a tobacco-free policy wasn't as supported from the individuals on Broward campus as it was, or Broward College, as it was from FAU. And we had to work through that because you couldn't have a policy that applied to one group but not another at the same location. So we met with decision makers at Broward College, and they said, well, if FAU is going to go tobacco free, then that's certainly something that we can do as well. So having that support from the decision makers, that was kind of key. Number 5. So if you have a program and you've established that the program produces benefits, are you in a situation where perhaps you don't have enough resources to make this available to every single individual? So how are you going to decide who gets the opportunity of participating in your program versus who doesn't? You just want to make sure that you maintain an equitable situation where everybody has an opportunity to participate if they so desire, and if that's not the case, the way that they're being selected to participate again follows ethical considerations as well. Number 6, the planning committee, right? You need to kind of establish this early on so that members can decide, hey, is this an appropriate level of commitment that I need to make, or is this something that's going to be long term? Do I want to be, am I going to be available for that? Is this going to lead to some turnover, some forced turnover that you have to address? So again, having a clear picture of what the organization of all this looks like will benefit you. Okay, and finally, what's the authority of the planning committee? Are we free to, make decisions within the committee and then put those decisions into play, or do we have to run this up the chain and somebody else has to decide, whether it's going to be? With the tobacco-free policy committee, it varied. So some issues we had to get higher approval. For other issues, as long as we operated within the existing policy guidelines of the university, namely the example that comes to my mind is the placement of signage announcing that FAU is tobacco free. The images and the design of the signage had to go through FAU's communications group to make sure that it aligned with, we're using the appropriate logos and colors and that sort of thing. and we were kind of free to decide, where we would place the signage. So, it's kind of a mixed bag, but understanding what authority you have and don't have, um, again, that helps you establish, um, you know, what level of effectiveness your committee has, what authority they have. That's something you need to work out.